Well, I'll say this. It's always a good day when one gets to talk with Sean Curran.
Stop
And
it.
dude, I'm just pumped to have you here today.
Thank you.
How's it going? How you feeling today?
Feeling great. A little jittery from the coffee, but that's par for the course for me. Got 2 kids,
It is.
young kids. The hurricane is in full effect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us about this hat that you have on. I've seen this in a couple of your videos.
Yes.
First off, Hook,
Hook, yeah.
is... I just watched the movie with my kids.
Yes. Oh,
like 6 months ago for the first time.
I'm dreaming of that moment. Tell me about it.
Okay. Here's what I'm learning, Sean, is super sentimental things to me.
Oh no.
That were like life-changing for me as a kid.
I don't want to hear this.
They're not impressed.
I don't want to hear this.
So I think they enjoyed it, but I like expected them to be like at the altar just weeping in awe of the beauty of Hook. But it wasn't quite that. They enjoyed it though.
Okay. Man, well, yes, I've thought about this moment. Hook is probably my favorite film. I rotate.
Why?
I don't know. I've loved the story of Peter Pan. I love Robin Williams. So there's just a lot of moving parts in that it has a bit of, a mystical nature to it, which I think is really cool. There's so much adventure in it. I just think he captures that character so well. I don't know. I see it as like one of the icons of my childhood. I just, we watched it so much. The cool, like, good versus evil stuff, just the simple stuff in that film is so awesome. But my sister got me this hat for Christmas, like, whenever, a couple years ago, and so I rotate through hats, and I love this one.
You know the scene that I probably think the most about in Hook? Every time I'm on an airplane,
yes.
I think of that airplane scene where the plane is like shaking and all the drink spilling. He's like grabbing onto his, like, literally every time I'm on a plane, that's what I think about. And I don't think that's very helpful.
It's not, but even that, like, he doesn't, I'm so caught up in the wonder of it. Like, he's Peter Pan. Right. But in that moment, he's forgotten who he was. Like, that's the last place he should be terrified in, There's just a lot of really interesting things to tease out of that. And what he goes through, like in Neverland with the Lost Boys and this sort of reawakening thing. I mean, I don't want to push the metaphors too far. I just really get caught up in it. It's so cool. Yeah.
I love it. So, Sean, before we talk about all the obvious stuff, right? You're a songwriter. You have an incredible new record out. Besides, like, Hook, the movie, what's something that you could talk about for hours that most people might be like, I didn't know that about Sean?
Oh, well, okay. I don't know if I could talk about this for hours, but something that people don't know about me as much these days is that when I was in middle school, this is always a funny sentence to me, but there was a time in my life where I was a professional yo-yoer. So this is like a real...
Wait, you're being serious, right?
This is not 2 truths and a lie. This is like the real deal. So I grew up in Florida. I don't know if this was nationwide. I think to some extent it was. But when I was in middle school, outside of Tampa, yo-yos blew up.
I live in Orlando, by the way. I'm not too far from where you grew up.
I feel like it was everywhere in Florida, at least, because yo-yo stores were popping up in the malls, and so they got banned from my private school because they were just whatever. It was a moment like Pokemon or something. Everybody was yo-yoing, and I just got so into it. It's kind of up my alley because I like doing things that only takes one person, and it takes a lot of like skill and finesse, and you have to work at it, and it's a craft. I don't know, all that, whatever, that's like yo-yoing is that way, and I don't know, I just got obsessed with it to the point where I got sponsored. Like, I was on I was on a real yo-yo team. We traveled around the country and competed. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was like I would just fly around the country with my dad. We had these uniforms that we wore that looked kind of like bowling uniforms. And I mean, man, like, so the world yo-yo competition was in Orlando for the longest time. And the national competition was in Chico, California. And so that was always like a really fun trip. But Orlando was right around the corner. And even now, I'll look up whoever won the world competition just to kind of see where the sport is at. It's crazy, but
So it's still a thing.
it's very much still a thing. So much so to where I can't even keep up with it now in terms of like the skill level. Because what happens in the competitive space is you have to go through a certain like vetting process. They're called compulsory tricks. So like everybody who competes has to go through, I don't know, call it like 15 tricks, and they're really intense, complicated tricks. And how well you do them, the judges can weed everybody out down to 10 people. So that's a really long process. But those 10 people, they do what's called a freestyle, and it's 2.5 minutes to music of yo-yoing. And you just yo-yo and do all these tricks, and maybe it can be timed to the music. That has kind of gone in and out of style. Like there was a couple years where it was all really choreographed, and then towards the end, and even more so now, it's not about that at all. It's about just like standing there and ripping through as many tricks as you can, and in front of judges,
Wow.
and they just sit there with like those people counters, when you're going into a show, and they click you in,
Yeah.
and they just click through the tricks. And so now I'll go up and I'll watch whoever won, their freestyle, and I don't understand the tricks that they're doing, like the technicalities of how to even do them. It's just progressed so beyond where we were at, and it's wild. But I could entertain you for a good 3 or 4 minutes with some yo-yo tricks that you've probably never seen. If you're thinking like rock the baby and walk the dog, it would be quite the party trick. I'll tell you that.
Do you have a yo-yo handy? Can you show us this?
That I wish I should have known this question was coming.
How would you have known this question was
So,
coming?
well, it does. Whenever anybody asks me something about that, like, it's just nice because it always catches people off guard,
I love it so much.
But I used to carry, we don't do this anymore, but back in the day, what was really popular were those big like laptop cases, just huge, and they were really thick, and they had 3 or 4 inches of like foam in them. And so what we would do is we'd get those, we'd cut out little circles in the foam, and you could fit like 20 yo-yos in there, and we would just walk around with these.
It's like a pelican case
Yes.
for yo-yos.
Yep. Yeah, man. Yeah, those were the days, as they say.
Dude, this is like
Welcome
this
to
is
my
quickly
world.
becoming like my favorite interview that I've ever done. So did you make all your money in yo-yoing so you're able to retire early?
I wish.
Is that kind of what happened?
There was some strange. There's not a lot of money to be had, but it was also like we were so young, so it all got tied into like sponsorships and free gear and things like that. But so I had
Love that.
all the yo-yos I competed with were my own yo-yos, like they had my name on them and a signature, all that stuff. It was fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. So take us into the person of Sean Curran. So I'm thinking kind of how you're wired, right? So on the one hand, you're a songwriter and a musician and artistic, and at least I picture you just kind of lock yourself away in this creative space and just like create and workshop just for hours on end. And now I have this picture of like yo-yoing, which requires a certain amount of like obsessiveness to just get really good at something. Repetition. Like, I don't know if back then you were watching YouTube videos, if that was even a thing then, to like learn how to do like yo-yo tricks. But what is it? I don't even know what I'm asking here. I didn't even plan to ask this, but what is it about how you're wired that sort of lends to your creativity. Does that make sense?
I think so. I do like a challenge, and I do am in many ways I'm fiercely independent, so the idea of being able to, research tricks like you're saying and practice them where the only thing in your way is yourself, like that
Yep.
is really motivating to me in ways that I don't really know how to describe, but I can just observe throughout my life that is something that has motivated me. At some point, that all of that energy played very well into me discovering music too, and God for that matter, because I grew up in church and I loved church and I didn't know anything else growing up. Like that was where community was, that was where activities were, that's where we spent all of our time. Like we were kind of one of those families. But I always was really taken aback by God, just the idea of God. And so when I sort of fell in love with music, it was a spiritual experience. And I was in middle school. I don't know, I want to say like 10. But very quickly, music and faith and God all became really intertwined. And it still is. So it has a similar essence of, for me, it's all more or less a way of perceiving. And so, I'm still trying to learn how to pray. Is a lot of times what I equate it to. And so when I pick up a guitar, I start talking to God about things. There's some sort of therapeutic activity happening, and for me, it's one of the best vehicles into me being able to perceive the world in a spiritual way and to engage with something as mysterious as the divine. It's really wild. I don't know if we let ourselves sit with these notions enough, but I'm really intrigued by even that. Like, okay, I have way more questions than answers all the time, but I have experienced something profound. And the deeper I go, the deeper he takes me, and the
Yep.
closer I get, the closer I want to be. And I don't know. I've become so much less interested in trying to answer all the questions. I really I've come to see and believe that, I think following Jesus is the best way to be human. I think we're designed for it. And yeah, music has just, it's really been a gift from God to me. I think I also spend a lot of time in my head, and I'm a thinker, and in some ways that creates its own sort of prison for me. The existential space is as beautiful as it is confounding, and God through music has really helped me move from my head into my soul and my heart in a lot of ways, because it can be a scary place up in that brain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if we lose our curiosity, it's like what are we even doing as artists or songwriters? Like if we become too familiar with the glory of God and the grandeur of
Yeah,
who he
man.
is. Like I think that's the battle right there is,
Yep.
how do I not become so familiar that I can't weep anymore when I hear the gospel? It just
Yes.
becomes like, oh,
Yes.
hey, I've heard this my whole life. Like, I get it. Jesus died on the cross, but it's like, wait a second. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Like, what is
Yeah.
this? And like revisiting that wonder
I
every
think
day.
you're hitting on something that is really important. It's definitely it's close to my heart, because the way that it plays out, particularly in songwriting, I just am perplexed by, because I feel like we're in an era right now where all of our songs, we feel the need to have all of our songs prove something. They're so overt and they're so almost combative sometimes, and I just many times I wonder if we're trying to force songs to be something that they aren't trying to be. There's so many different modes of communication, and as humans we actually are resourced with all sorts of styles, literary tools, but oftentimes songs are at their best when they're not, maybe you could say, like, what they are trying to be is maybe something like a companion, where at their best they're not trying to answer all your questions. They're like a great therapist or something. They're trying to walk with you long enough for you to discover the answers yourself. I think songs have that quality about them, that patience, that healthy ambiguity, where the goal is to maybe give language to an experience that helps you discover something, instead of, we use them oftentimes like we use a proof text. We just want to say a statement, and we want to say it as loud as we can, and we kind of make it mean whatever we want it to mean to fit our agenda. I don't think that that's the best way to write a song, or at least we're missing out on a lot of the potential that art offers us.
Do you think, especially in worship music, like this is a challenge, right? Because it's almost like you are kind of forced into this box, or in the back of your mind as a writer, you're like, okay, let me analyze like super successful worship songs, right? And why it's super successful. And it's like, I just have to sort of write like this to be successful. And we're not tapping into more creativity because we're sort of influenced by the industry and, worship music. Like, do you wrestle with that?
This is a really complex question. Yes, in every sense. I mean, all this stuff haunts me, to be honest. Keeps me up at night. Maybe you could ask me this question and I'd have 1,000 different answers for it, depending on, how I'm feeling, I guess, or how I relate to it in the moment. Because currently, this is a Pandora's box in some ways, but I'm not really sure what is even happening in worship music right now. Like, I grew up with, I'm so thankful in a way that I grew up without it even really being a genre. It's still such it's such a young thing. It's a really young genre. And so now we're standing in a moment where I'm just looking out at the landscape of whatever it's come to mean. And, on one hand, I'm just not sure how to relate to it. The things that concern me, one of the main things that concerns me is that, in a sense, we've forsaken anointing and we've replaced it with charisma.
Wow.
And we're having a harder and harder time telling the difference.
That's heavy, bro.
And it's not in every space, and I'm not, it's not like I'm trying to just be overly critical. I just think that we're living in a time where it's really important for us to know how to tell the difference and how to honor one over the other. Another dynamic that I've been thinking about so much over the past few years, because it's one that I grew up with, and I'd love to hear how you feel about this, but I grew up in a space where we thought we were doing a lot of good, and I think we were, but we really portrayed the idea of religion in a negative light. Like, there was such language and energy around something like, it's not about a religion, it's about a relationship, right? These types of ideas. And I think at its best, that can help people relate to a God who wants to be discovered, right? At its best, we're not just trying to do rituals. We actually believe that God made us to be with us. God's presence is to be enjoyed. I think all of that is the better side of cultivating language around relationship and religion. But I also think, though, that we've reached a point where we've pushed that so far that we just have to observe the effects of pushing it too far, because I'd say we're in a space now where we've totally forsaken liturgy and we've replaced it with celebrity. And, you know, that is unhelpful. I don't think that's the result that everybody was looking for. And so, yeah, when it comes to worship as a genre, goodness, I'd love for us to be not so tethered to the algorithm. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, goodness, we have been commissioned as stewards of God's presence, where we are actually, in God's eyes, we bear his image as high priests. We have this beautiful stewardship on us to cultivate a presence where us as his people can engage with him and minister unto him and give him a song. And I think, you know, in some ways it's very easy for us in this day and age to trade our birthright for clickbait.
Wow.
You know, for whatever is hyped up and presented to us on social media. You know, and as far as I'm concerned, almost all, if not all, of social media is just false advertising. You know, the algorithms are designed to play at our worst impulses. It probably shouldn't be the driving force of how we design our set lists. You know, so we're in an interesting time. Sorry, I'm just rambling.
No, it's so good. Because I think there is a generation, and maybe that's too broad a description, that is sort of, I think, fed up with the sort of seeker, celebrity-driven, hyped-up church experience.
Right.
I mean, when I was a kid, I used to love that. It was kind of new. It was like, holy cow, acquire the fire, and just, wow, just so much hype, and just wow. And I think there's a lot of people who are a little disillusioned by that, and some of them are leaving the faith, but others are just finding a new expression, you know, Anglicanism and more like liturgical forms where they're burned out on the hype and they just want something real and genuine that puts deep roots, you know, down into God. And
I agree. You know, I love these spaces. I think I would just say that I think many of us, myself at the top of the list, like many of our first encounters with God were in these spaces.
100%.
You know, and so there's so much beauty that can come with the gathering. I mean, it's a pillar of our faith. So for in my mind, it's not, we shouldn't try to figure out a way to neglect that. It's more me just raising the observation in my own life, and I think, and it's reflective in a lot of others, where we learned how to encounter God in sensational spaces, but we don't know how to encounter God in our everyday life.
Yeah, it's so good.
And I think if anything can be a faithful tool at properly narrating that experience, it can be music. And I care a lot about that.
So you said, Sean, we've pursued charisma over anointing. I wonder if you could unpack that for the worship leader. Like if I were asking myself, how do I pursue the anointing of God on my life over and above just working a room? Like, what do I even do to ensure that that's happening in my heart.
This is the intangibles, man. I would say that it's first about priorities. I think these settings have led us to believe that in order for a good worship experience to happen, we got to get out there and coerce the people into every hand raised. And I'm just suggesting that I think the main priority in the context of worshiping God is God. And so we are to raise the banner of God so high that we couldn't see around it even if we tried. And something about that process removes the platform. It pulls us out of focus. It pulls God into focus. And it creates a habitable space for the presence of God to reacquaint us and unite us with our most deepest desires and purposes. And so I think that that's just it's a perspective that if onboarded seriously, I think would shape the way that people lead. And it would maybe be more about compelling than coercing. And I think the presence of God is almost more like hoisting up the sails and letting the wind blow, take us where it wants to, riding a wave, things of that nature. To be a great worship leader is actually to be a great follower. What is God doing? What is God doing? So that's one little note. I think we're supposed to be so full as people that when we get into these spaces, there's something about the overflowing and the pouring out of our worship that's so intoxicating that people are beckoned to engage. And if we've been journeying with God and we understand, we're familiar in some sense with the presence of God, there's a well-worn path. And so we can start to walk that path and encourage people to come along. To me, that whatever that looks like, it looks a little different than what I feel like we're led to believe these days, because all we see is the 10 seconds or the 3 seconds of the most souped up, hyped up end of camp moment. And we're led to believe that that's what all of our moments are supposed to be like. And I don't think that that's true or accurate,
I think there's a way that we can carry ourselves as worship leaders that either draws attention to the stage or draws attention to God. Yeah. And I don't even totally know what it is. So Sean, for example, I remember years ago, you were leading worship at it was a national worship leader conference. This is probably before you were part of Passion. You might have still been Bella Reeve, years ago. And that worship experience just stands out to me. Every time I'm in a service, I'm worshiping the Lord, but I'm also trying to learn how to be a better worship leader. I don't know, it's in my DNA, I guess. But you led worship one of the sessions, and there was another high-profile artist that led another session, and I'm not here to put them down. But that experience was very much sort of a kind of a worship performance, walking out on stage, here we are kind of a thing. Whereas what struck me was you were just sitting at your Rhodes, and there was no big, flashy, massive intro. It was maybe a little pad. You just started talking to the room and drawing our attention to the Lord. And I've never really seen this before. How can you not open a service with a hyped up fast song? And there's nothing wrong with that. But the way that you just stewarded that moment immediately just drew our attention to the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I'm just so grateful for that, because that's something I think about often that was very formative for me just as a worship leader. I don't always have to, I have the capacity to draw attention to the glory of God, by the way that I lead, and that's what I want to do, you know?
Wow.
So anyway, I just wanted to thank you for that.
That's cool to hear, man. Yeah, Bella Reef days is. I used to love playing the Rhodes. I still do. It's amazing. Yeah.
You got the Rhodes there in your studio?
Yes, it's. Let me see. It's over here. You can't see
Nice.
it, but yeah, I do. I have a tendency to try and make the room smaller in terms of how it feels, because I do think that usually results in intimacy. You know, and worship is an extremely intimate thing. Like, we're supposed to be bearing our souls. It can be really fragile. It can be, honestly, it can be a little overwhelming. And
Yes.
yeah, I'm really trying to help people mean what they say. And that can be a really challenging thing. You know, these are really wild dynamics. Like, these are not easy questions. I don't in any way think that I should be an expert on these things, but just experientially, I am trying to encounter the Lord, you know, and have other people do the same thing. And, you know, I feel like early on, my main concern was, and this is still very real, but, you know, the kind of the classic narrative of, you know, everybody's just standing there. Like, why can't they get into it? Like, why don't, you know, I feel I've become so much less, I see that so much less as a concern. It's like that 80-year-old woman that's standing in the back of the room that isn't jumping around, but that has walked with God for longer than I've been alive. She can probably teach me a thing or two. I don't have to yell at her. You know, the thing that concerns me more these days is sort of the other side of the coin. It's like, what happens when you're in a room and everybody's hands raised, but it's hard to tell if we're encountering God or if we're all just singing our favorite song. You know, optics are crazy. And, you know, Jesus spends so much time talking about the what's going on in here, and we've spent a lot of time defining success by what's happening on the outside of us.
Yes.
And I think we're going through a season where we need to be more discerning. Amazing songs aren't the problem. We should all sing. It's so amazing when God kind of kisses a song and it is meant for the world to sing. I think I'm trying to think about how worshiping God should be realistic, in the sense that it's so tangible. It shouldn't be reserved for the elite, you know. So somehow God cares just as much about this little church that doesn't write any big songs.
Right.
And I think that we could cultivate a better language for what that means, and how as a worship pastor, how do I actually care for what's in my hands?
Yeah.
This is where God has me. This is where God is. This is where God is.
Yeah.
It's quite a concept.
Dude, it's wild to think about how maybe worship songs are, I wouldn't say they're contributing to the problem, but can be a tendency to worship music, or to worship the feeling of worship rather than God himself. You know, we're going deep here. This is like super deep stuff.
This is what we do with everything. We have a tendency as humans, because we can't help, like, it's kind of in our DNA, right? It's part of our makeup.
Right.
We're at our best when we're surrendered. But God's actually given us the autonomy to point that needle wherever. And so often we choose to give ourselves over to other things. And that's, like, to me, that is sin. Like, corrupted worship, that is sin, right? We do it. We just do it. And so Yeah, it's a wild thing. I I a lot of this music is trying to touch on that just for me personally, you know. I'm
Yeah.
trying to cultivate a mindset and a heart posture where the way that I define something like revival isn't just about the learned behavior that I've grown up with about what revival looks like in a room. At some point, I don't even know what that is. What does revival look like as a husband? What does it look like as a dad? You know, what is Jesus thinking about when he's thinking about the word revival? You know, I just think, again, music does have, arts in general have an ability to help us speak the things that haunt us, help us maybe close the gaps between who we think we are and maybe who we actually are. And yeah, it is deep stuff, but that's the only way through.
Yeah. Do you think worship music needs to lean more artistic or less artistic?
I don't. My whole life has been wrapped up in being on so many different sides of this question. Oh gosh,
It's hard, right? Because there's right, because so many people talk about engagement in worship, and if it's too creative, then you just have a congregation that's just kind of watching the creativity.
Yeah.
I've tried to put myself on both sides of it, and I'm coming around to just the beauty of art.
Yeah.
And the importance of creativity, but at the same time, that can also be abused to where the church is watching the professionals, but not fully entering in.
Sure.
So I don't know how you are wrestling with that.
This is
Because you're super artistic.
I'll tell you where I'm at the moment. And again, this is just me. We're just spitballing.
Yep.
I feel like there was a time in my life where I tried to blend it all at all times. I've moved away from that position. I feel like there is something extremely particular and extremely sacred about the goal and the purpose of God's people gathering to give praise and glory to God the Father and the Son and the Spirit. Like, that's actually a pillar of our faith, and it's also been worked into. God wants it regimented. Like, we do this weekly. It's a habit. Habits are powerful because there's things
Yep.
that we do that eventually do things to us, you know? And so
Right.
for better, if you got a good habit, that's great. If you got a bad habit, that is not good. They have a trajectory, right? So like pure worship unto God has a trajectory that forms us rightly. And so I'm kind of the mindset these days that it is the most rock and roll thing in the world to sanctify that time and let it be only that. What does that look like? I think it looks like singing songs that raise the banner of God, like we talked about. We could get through a whole worship set and have not sung about Jesus. We've sung about deliverance, and we've sung about, our trials, and we've overcome this. And it's like, these are all awesome things. It's just, so there's just a thought that I have there about, okay, what are the expectations when the people of God gather? What should we be reminding ourselves of? And what should be the primary focus? And how do we write songs that really emphasize that? And so, but then I also, the other side of that coin is that I'm a deeply creative person. I think there's an outlet for that as well. And, we do have a lot of songs that help us worship God well. I don't know if we have articulated well the art of wrestling with God well. I'm trying to explore that space currently. Like, what does it look like to actually cultivate a space? I just wish we had some different words, because I kind of wish that we didn't call it worship. like as a genre. I wish that we had a word that described the process of attributing glory and honor to God communally as his people, and then we had another word to describe what it means to write music that faithfully articulates the intersection of life and God. How do you wrestle with God well? When you go through something unexplainable, how do you find God there? When you actually
Right.
have a mountaintop experience, what is actually happening? How do you find God there? When you're actually in the deepest pit you've ever been in, surely God must be there. What does that
Yep.
look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like? When you're just on your way to
Totally.
the beach, can you have a song that is in the art of beauty that just kind of accompanies that moment so well and helps you find God in this moment of gratitude? I feel like we could really use a little bit more of that expression, which actually means singing
Yep.
about a way wider range of topics.
Yes.
And sounds, and exploring way more sounds.
Yep.
Yep. It's a really interesting conundrum.
Yeah. Talk about, so your new project, Basic Faith.
Yeah.
Talk about, I know we just sort of not criticized, but looked critically at, creativity and corporate
of
worship
course.
music. But like, I'm a musician. You may not
Yep.
think this, but I do love creativity and I love music and I love art. What about the process of creating this record was unique as compared to past projects that you've been a part of? Like, take us into your creative day-to-day of writing these songs and arranging these songs and experimenting and digging deep with this project.
Well, also, so it was over the course of 2 years.
That's a long time.
And it's a long time. I just have to say too that they were certainly 2 of the hardest years of my life. So a lot of what we've already been talking about is woven into the essence of the project. Over the course of 1 year, I became a father and lost a father. What do you do with all that? It's just, what do you do with it? And to be fair, I feel like although those are very normal things, like most everybody has to go through something like that, great joy and great loss, I felt really under-resourced. Like I was looking around in the arts for songs that would maybe help narrate that roller coaster for me, and it was really hard to find. So I think, one of the main themes of this project for me was trying to resource myself with the thing that I needed. It's just like, and oddly enough, it really starts to sound like modern psalms. Like the biggest resource we have for music in all of Scripture are these wild prayers to God from a desperate person, in either total desperation or total adoration, that seem to be totally disconcerted with how God is perceiving them in the moment. They're not concerned if they are saying it right or if they've got their theology right, or they're just on their knees saying,
raw.
God, have mercy on me. What is going on? Or, I've just seen you do the most remarkable thing, and I don't feel like I have the words to describe it right now. Can I just sit with you? These things that, or I was just on a walk with my daughter, and I think I felt you through her eyes in a greater way than I've ever experienced before. Is that what childlike faith looks like? It's just like we are living right now. And I want to write songs. Sometimes our songs have a tendency to check us out. And I want to write songs that help check us in, you know. What is can we stare a little longer, see what's right in front of us? You know, honestly, it terrifies me that the people that had the hardest time seeing God right in front of them were the religious people. It terrifies me. It terrifies me, you know?
Yep.
So, yeah, I spent 2 years walking through things I've never walked through, but carrying this unrelenting hope that God is in the midst of it.
Yep.
What does that sound like? So the whole record kind of is soaking with this sort of unrelenting hope meets unrelenting curiosity meets just the most raw sort of vulnerability that I've ever. It's like when your nerve endings are exposed. It's actually a really great time to make art, even if it's hard, because you tell the truth. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that actually, I've actually found that that's all that God's waiting for. No one ever finds God by being right. He wants us to be honest. And somehow that creates just enough of an open door for the Spirit of God to rush in and start to do the things that he's good at, like restoration or transformation. Yeah, so these songs are about life, and
I love it. It's
yeah,
basic faith, bro. Basic faith.
that's why I like the title.
Come
It kind of winks at you. It's like, hey, I'm not saying it's simple, but it is fundamental. This is how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it kind of hints to what we talked about earlier, where we've had a tendency, and we still have a tendency, to kind of chase the sensational experiences, which are wonderful,
Yep.
right? Where you just encounter God in a meeting or at an altar. But we also need to encounter him in the hospital, you know, when you're praying for a healing and it hasn't come.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do with that? Do you have a theology that can support suffering, right?
Yeah.
Because God is right there with you
Yes.
in the middle of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's right there with you when you are radically healed, you know, or there's some massive breakthrough. He's there in all of it. And we can't explain why things happen at certain times, but we do know that he's always there, you know?
I love it.
So I'm going to let you go here. I could talk to you forever, but I don't even know, you might have another interview. But
This feels great. Yeah.
Talk to us about Let's Go music, right? So just like the sonic structure, like what's inspiring you today musically as opposed to or compared to, you know, like 10, 15 years ago? Has anything changed?
In some ways, the pursuit hasn't changed, because even back in Belle Rive, we thought about it like this. But I really, you know, when I write a song, I try to let the song lead me. You know, what are you trying to become? That is my job. It's to excavate, you know. And so, and then when it comes to the production, I usually say it's like, I just want it to be wearing the right clothes, you know, like it can be flattering, you know, when a song is speaking the right dialect, wearing the right outfit. Is it being expressed in a way that is harmonious with what it's trying to communicate? And I like that it's just that ambiguous, because I don't get snagged. I don't get snagged on trying to force this song to be a fast song, or to force it to have a worship build, you know. There's 12 songs on this project. We've got to be dynamic enough to not say the same thing and have it sound the same way 12 times.
It's got to be interesting.
We're trying
As a whole.
to tell a bigger story. Even thematically, there's such a pressure, particularly in like Christian music, to have every song tell the whole story, you know. And I really resisted that. It's like there will be a song that, if, you know, something as simple as, you know, there's a song called Come Now, and it's kind of reminiscing about these wonderful experiences that we have with God, and but the whole point of the song is just to clear the surface and like remind your heart again that that experience is real, and that it's possible, and that it could be brimming right underneath the surface right now. But then it just gets you there. It gets you to the door. And then the other song opens the door, you know, and we got a whole set. I don't need there to be this big resolve on that song or to take you from step 1 to step 10. So I liked having that runway as well. There's some pop, a lot of like sort of like dream pop influence on the record, some rock and roll. I tried to limit a lot of the soundscapes to like what I could do in this room. So I've got 2 synths. I've got an OB6 and a Juno 60. I've got a Wurlitzer, that red Wurlitzer, a Rhodes, and a CP70, and a couple guitars. You know, so it's like, that's like a Brian Eno thing. Like, the limitations are not limiting. They
Totally love
they
that.
help you explore, you know. They give you guardrails, you know, to go further. So,
If you had to pick one instrument today, like, to build a song from, what would it be?
the instrument that I've loved the most is electric guitar.
Why?
Like, I don't know if I would be a musician without it. There was something about the raw kind of power of it that just felt so ungovernable. Just like, what am I holding? Like, how, you know? And I live in my head. We talked about that. I have a tendency not to express myself, not because I don't have feelings. Sometimes I feel like they're so deep and so overwhelming that I don't know where to start, you know?
So you're loving this podcast interview, right?
Well, I've you know, this is like 10-year-old me. It's like, I don't know how to live. But so then you can feel that, you know, that person who's like really has a lot of existential stuff going on, but is probably more of an introvert, is definitely not a performer. Like I experienced the song, and I've tried to learn how to invite people into that. But like, so someone like that who doesn't know how to transmit things comes across this instrument that you can like plug in and turn it up and just play one note, and you're like, yeah, that's what I feel. I can do that.
Yep.
Like, I don't know if I can get all these words out, but I can do that. That was so important for me, and it still is.
So what's your favorite electric guitar, like desert island guitar pedal amp?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know. I've never been good at, like, I'll tell you that I've got this red Jazzmaster that's on every song on the project. It's the one I tracked with the most. And I've never had a guitar that had this much of a story connected to it, and I really like it, because when my dad passed, a couple of my friends, without me knowing it, they, like, you know, put some money together and got me this guitar and gave it to me in sort of a way, like, what do you do? You know, what do you do when tragedy strikes?
Wow.
And especially when someone dies before their time, you know?
Yeah.
And these people know me really well. They know the way I process, and they know it would have a lot to do with music and sitting with a guitar and talking to God. And so they just got me this guitar, you know, like therapy. It's what it's been. I play it every day. So that's really the only guitar I'm playing right now. And it's awesome. But it's funny because I've never been a jazz master. I've always wanted a jazz master, but I've never had one. Like, the closest thing I've had to it has been maybe like a Mustang, but that's like a short scale kind of, but it's just corky, kind of like a jazz master. But I've loved it. I've got a Benson amp. I think the Monarch is the name of it. It's been so long, but that's the only one I play. It's funny. I don't know if you know Benson amps, but they were all they just blew up. Like they were all the rage the past couple years. But I walked into a store in Portland and there was this amp sitting there, and it was like a no name brand, and I played it and I was like, this amp is insane. Like, no, I ended up the guy who makes Benson amps at the time, this was like back in 2015 or something, was just the amp tech for that store. He would just do repairs, and he was working on his designs, and he had like a, an early model, and I bought it, and that's what I have. And now he's Benson amps. That's pretty tight.
That's amazing.
That's all I got.
I love it. Well, Sean, we'll close with this. This has been kind of a fun worship leader question, but if you had to put together, say, a 2 to 3 song worship set, and you had to lead it, 10 minutes from now, what's one song that you would pick from your new project, and then another song that you had no part in writing? What would your set be?
Wow. Okay, I'm just going to say what just popped into my head. And sometimes you just do this. Like, this isn't.
That's what I want.
So a song that is on my project that I think is really an important thing for God's people to sing is called He Who Is to Come.
Such a good song, bro.
Yeah, and I just think that we really have done a good job at narrating a lot of the pillars of why we should love God, like, and the pillars of our faith. Like, we sing about that Jesus became like us to free us from ourselves. We sing about the cross. We sing about how he went down into the depths to pull us up out of it. But something that in the past, 30 years or so, 40 years, we haven't sung much about is this promise that holds it all together, which is he's coming back. He's coming back. Like, we're living in an age where it's like we've zoomed in so far that everything's pixelated and we don't even know what we're looking at, and it's almost like we're all walking through static, and it really makes us susceptible to fear and the toilings of fear. And if we could just zoom out and hold on to this larger promise that sort of holds it all together and keep our feet on the ground, it's that someday he's coming back and he's going to set it all right. Like, the kingdom of God is not under threat. He's got it, so that's an important song for people to sing.
I agree.
And then the song that popped into my head instantly, for reasons that are just beyond me, is a song called I Love You, Lord. It's just that chorus, like, I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice. Like, I don't even know why I almost want to weep when I sing that song, but it's so pure. It's so childlike. I've learned a lot about childlikeness is not the same as childishness, right? And having kids helps you decipher that. But there's something about the purity of that song. You have a really hard time singing that without it stirring all of your affections to God. Even though it's not insistent upon itself. It's not trying to communicate a certain, theology. It's not trying to communicate a certain, like, gospel message. And I'm not, saying anything negative about that. It's just, it gets you to that space where you can tell that God is close. You can tell that God delights in you and that his presence is real. And man, that's the place I want to be. Like, it's the good stuff.
So good. Well, and kind of wrapping this up, right? Tying back to what we started talking about. Like, I feel like adding songs like I Love You, Lord into a worship set sort of combats the sort of hype celebrity experience a little bit. It sort of centers the room.
Yeah.
hey, let's bring it down. Just love on the Lord in this moment. Just let it be simple. Back off the mic. Just let the people of God just sing for a few minutes. And I love that. I threw that out just on my social media like a couple of months ago. Just, hey, what are some old songs that you revisit
Oh, that's cool.
a lot? And it's really cool to see, man. Like that one came up, and Agnus Dei.
Yeah, same thing. Oh,
I mean,
man. Yeah.
just so many others that are just so like centering. But Sean, thank you for hanging out today.
Yeah, great questions, man. We did. I feel like it's the only way.
The only way to go, man. So let's do this again sometime. Anything you want to let our listeners know before we go? The project is Basic Faith, and at the time of this recording is not out yet.
Oh, yeah.
But
it's close. Oh, it's real
coming. It's coming. So, but if you go, I mean, Led Me to You, Basic Faith, He Who Is to Come, all three of those can be streamed right now. And then August 9th, right? That's
August 9th.
It's like a week away.
It's right around the corner. I just, goodness, music is so cool. God is so cool.
I love music.
They have a really beautiful relationship. I hope that these songs meet you where you are, and I hope they take you where you need to go, and that is faith. So we'll walk it together.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.